Hello, everyone. Are you seeing a message on your screen? This meeting's being recorded.
Yep. We'll cut this bit out when we upload it, Don. You just get going.
My cursor is blocked with that message, and so I can't close it without escaping here. I don't know why.
Recording stopped.
I'll stop the recording if you want to try again.
All right, let's try again. Should be the same issue, though.
Do you want to go back to the first slide? That's it. Okay. Right.
Okay.
3, 2, 1.
Yeah. Hello, everyone.
Recording in progress.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Libraries in Response, session 73, not 7. Forgive the typo there. Conversation with Cory, April the 6th. This actually is our 73rd in this series that we began in March of 2020 in response to the pandemic, as in what's going on and what does it all mean. That seemed like a really long time ago. I don't know if everybody else has the same experience of time warp, of how long it's been since something happened. You think it's been like 3 years. It couldn't possibly be 3 years. We've been locked down for 3 years practically. Anyway, we've been migrating through a number of different crises that have gone on since then: the health crisis, social crisis, political, economic, and the major crisis that we're all facing, the climate crisis. We are the Gigabit Libraries Network, open collaboration of tech innovating libraries around the world. And our partner in this series and our host today is the International Federation of Library Associations and Institutions, IFLA, in The Hague, with Stephen Wyber there at the controls. This is our session today, correctly identified as session 73, with a special guest, Cory Doctorow, who I think is known to all of you here, or maybe you wouldn't even be here, but nevertheless, we're really happy and glad, Cory, that you made the time for us today, and we're looking for interesting interaction. Interacting with Cory will be Stephen and Jonathan, who are on today, and we'll all also be watching for any questions to put into the conversation. Cory mentions the modern robber barons, and it got me thinking, I wonder if 4 or 5 is a natural number of robber barons. Do they kind of max out at that number? And so I went back to, the kind of first use of that term and found this, which it kind of confirms that number. But also, interestingly, Carnegie noted among those is the richest guy at the time for steel, the critical technology to do all the building that was going on at the time. But then he became philanthropic, what we would call philanthropic. I mean, we don't know what his motivations were. Was it he thought he actually felt guilty? Unlikely, but he maybe felt like he needed to sort of repay all of his good luck and do something for other people. He also was notably someone who had benefited from libraries himself and thought that it fit his philosophy of self-help and self-development. And the library is a place, of course, that offers you the chance to do that. Are these our modern barons today? I mean, it looks kind of a similar list. These are really the dominant industries, the dominant companies in these information technology industries. But as I mentioned, not all of their activities are negative, and that by 1920, Carnegie libraries represent half of the public libraries in the United States, which is impressive. Now we are, in this era of libraries under siege, which is just so surprising on one level. We'd always felt like libraries are, apolitical and not in the middle of the controversies surrounding, I don't know, much of anything. Libraries are really, really popular. Half the U.S. population are active library users. Once a day or once a year, but they're library members, and which is a stunning number, at least to me. But nevertheless, they are. But now they seem to be facing all kinds of challenges and attacks, These are just, a random set of headlines and stories that it's discouraging on one level, but it's not totally surprising because it is pretty much, right out of the standard autocracy playbook, is to shut down open discussion. But shutting down things is really anathema. We think of librarians, and I'm speaking to most of you who are librarians, as fairly modest people or moderate in their behavior. But once you start challenging specific rights, like of free expression or for private inquiry, you suddenly see, the beast come out. I mean, somebody really strongly held beliefs about these rights, and this is a display here. Couldn't help but I would laugh if it wasn't making me cry. Banning the Wizard of Oz and Hop on Pop. I mean, people are nuts out there. So. So we are back to our program now with Cory, Stephen, and Jonathan. So with that, I will thank you all for your indulgence on this opening remarks, and turn it over to Cory for his remarks, and then we'll have Stephen moderate the interaction with Jonathan and the rest of you, and I'll be keeping an eye on the chat. So thank you very much.
Thank you. My first I have a procedural note. So the way to make a Zoom conference look natural is to stare directly into the camera, which militates against looking at one's notes. And so what I end up doing is putting my notes behind the camera over the Zoom window, which works great, except sometimes the connection drops and then I speak to a blank screen for 60 minutes and then look up and realize that my do not disturb mode phone has been getting messages for the last hour saying we lost you. I have the chat visible in a corner of my screen. If my connection drops, please put something in the chat and I'll see it. That's just a little process note for this moment here in the early 21st century. Thank you very much for having me. I stan libraries. Every writer is supposed to say that, but I was a page, I was a cataloger. I'm now on the faculty at the University of North Carolina as a visiting professor of practice in the library school. I worked with Eiffel and IFLA at the World Intellectual Property Organization when I was there on behalf of the Electronic Frontier Foundation, and indeed helped found Access to Information Africa with Eiffel and IFLA, which was an NGO based in Uganda that promoted open access and specifically organized African scholarly institutions to resist the calls by the U.S. Trade Representative to remove photocopiers and open access materials from university libraries. Someone's saying my audio level is low. Okay, let me just crank my audio a bit here. Oh, hi, Jolie. It's nice to see you. I've been having problems with Zoom and my audio lately, and I don't know what to do about it because
it's pretty good, Cory. It's pretty good.
Is that better?
Okay. It's okay for us.
Is up now. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. Okay. So I am, despite my youthful vigor, an old guy. I am now 51 years old. It is my job as a 51-year-old to complain about how things used to be better. I have 2 artificial hips. I have cataracts. I am definitely in that role. And despite the cliche of someone of my advanced years saying things used to be better, I really do think things used to be better on the web. I think that we had a better internet when it wasn't just 5 giant websites filled with screenshots of text from the other 4. And the talk today is about how we got there. And I think it relates to libraries because it relates to the way that choke points have been erected in our information landscape and specifically what we can do about it. So I think to understand the degradation of our web, you have to understand the underlying dynamics of platform economics. So platform formally is a service that offers something to sellers and something to buyers and connects the 2 of them. So, the NASDAQ is a platform, but like so is Uber or eBay. You have sellers, drivers, right? You have buyers, passengers. You have the platform mediating between them. And in platform economics, there's a kind of playbook that we've seen repeated in all of our digital platforms that have survived. The first thing that the platforms do is they allocate surpluses. Surpluses is a word economists use to mean roughly goodies. Since the great financial crisis, I've been really leaning into figuring out how to talk like an economist, primarily so I can make fun of them. So these surpluses, these goodies, are first allocated to users in an attempt to lock in the users. Once those users are firmly cemented to the platform, the surpluses are clawed back from those users. They're allocated to business customers, advertisers, publishers, platform sellers, gig workers, creators, or performers, until those business users are locked in. And then once both sides of this two-sided market are locked in, the platform scoops all of the surpluses up for themselves. I was just at a conference in Brussels on antitrust, where one of the speakers, a commissioner for the European Union, said it's very hard to get people to care about this stuff. It's so dry. I have a way of getting people to care about it. I came up with a snappy name for this process. I call it enshittification. And enshittification, it really is why everything is genuinely worse these days. I'm going to walk you through a quick case study here, and then I'm going to talk about what we can do about it. So the case study, it's just too obvious to pass up here, is Amazon. Amazon was at first very good to its customers. It subsidized goods, it subsidized shipping, it subsidized returns. And then it had these ways of locking those customers to the platform. You know, a social media platform has got a little easier. If you go on Facebook because your friends are there, then you can't leave because your friends are there, and your friends can't leave because you're there. You're engaged in an act of mutual hostage taking. Amazon, it was a little subtler, it was a little trickier. So one thing they did was they sold people their shipping a year in advance. That is a way of making sure that people only shop on Amazon, right? So Prime is now in the majority of US households, and most Prime subscribers start their search on Amazon. If they find what they're looking for, they don't go anywhere else. So that's one way to kind of lock people in. Another way to lock people in, of course, is digital rights management. So I don't have to tell a library audience what digital rights management is, but I do think that sometimes library audiences don't quite grasp the legal ramifications of DRM. So Section 1201 of the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, passed in 1998, makes it a felony to supply someone with a tool to remove DRM. And that is true irrespective of whether there's a copyright infringement. It's true irrespective of whether you are the rights holder to the work that is behind the DRM. So if Amazon puts DRM on one of my books that I wrote, that I hold the copyright to, and I give you a tool to remove that DRM, so you can take your ebook, your audiobook off of Amazon's platform and divorce Amazon, move to another platform, I commit a felony punishable by a 5-year prison sentence and a $500,000 fine. By contrast, if you were to merely pirate that book, the maximum civil damages are $150,000. So it is more of a copyright violation for the author of a book to give you the tools to, in a non-infringing way, move that book from Amazon to a rival platform than it is for you to simply pirate the book. Right? That means that every dollar that a customer spends on a DRM restricted media file is a dollar that they'll have to forfeit if they ever want to break up with Amazon, because all of those books are locked to Amazon's platform until Amazon decides to unlock them. So long as there's a single copyrighted work covered with Amazon DRM, it is unlawful to supply people with a tool to unlock any of the works, irrespective of whether they're in the public domain, from Amazon's DRM. So the users get locked in. Prime, DRM. Also, the increasing sales on Amazon denudes the high street. There are fewer brick and mortar retailers that you can go to. It's harder to shop somewhere else, which means that you often have to buy things from Amazon. There's not anywhere else to go. So once those users are locked into Amazon, Amazon withdraws the surplus from them and gives it to the sellers. So the sellers get low platform fees, they get preferential terms, they get a very clean search interface. If you list a product and its model number and I search for that product by its model number, that's at the top of the results. It's a huge sales funnel for both manufacturers who can go direct to consumer through Amazon, or indirectly to consumer, but not through a retailer, another retailer that then sells on Amazon. And it's good for smaller retailers that use Amazon as their platform. Now, once those buyers are locked in and dependent on the sellers, and the sellers are locked in because that's where all the buyers are, Amazon withdraws the surplus from both of them and allocates it to itself. So if you search on Amazon today, the first screen of results is ads. The first 5 screens of results are 50% ads. Of the remaining 50%, a substantial fraction are lookalike products where Amazon has used its proprietary access to data generated by its own sellers to clone its sellers' products, go through its sellers' manufacturing partners, and displace those sellers' products by putting its own products above them. Now, Amazon has a $31 billion advertising business. And indeed, whenever people talk about monopoly in ad tech and they say, oh, Google and Facebook have got this, durable lock on advertising, someone will always pop up and say, oh, no. It's possible for a new firm to enter the market. Look at Amazon. They've got $31 billion in advertising. But Amazon advertising is not like Google and Facebook advertising, which is not to say that those are great businesses with nothing problematic about them. But what Amazon means by advertising is that in order to be at the top of the search results in the first screen, which is all ads, or 50% of the first 5 screens, in order to get there, you have to outbid other people for that search term. So if you search for Duracell, the top result across the top of the screen is Duracell. That's an ad. Duracell has to buy that ad to be at the top of the screen. Otherwise, rivals of Duracell go at the top of the ad. In aggregate, $31 billion from sellers being transferred to Amazon in order to be at the top of your search results. And the thing that is at the top of your search results when you search is not the best product. It's the product willing to spend the most to advertise, which is why it's so hard to buy good products on Amazon these days. And it's also why Amazon discontinued Amazon Smile, which was its product where if you started your search on Amazon, they would give a small fraction of whatever you spent to a charity of your choosing. The point of that was to get people to search on Amazon and not on Google, because Google will take you directly to the product. You type Amazon model number into Google, Google will give you the direct link. And then Amazon actually has to pay a referral fee to Google. Whereas if you go to Amazon, they can turn your attention into a commodity that they sell to their own sellers to degrade the process. So advertising is one part of Amazon's bundle of junk fees. All told today, more than 50% of the sale price of all goods in Amazon Marketplace offered by third parties, more than 50% is consumed by junk fees. Now, there's no such thing as a seller with a 50% margin, right? Unless maybe they're a monopolist like Amazon. Probably Amazon Web Services has a 50% margin. But like if you're selling widgets or, more importantly, books, you do not have a 50% margin. And so everyone who sells on Amazon has to raise their price. Otherwise, they lose money on every sale. Now, the reason it's hard to determine that those prices have gone up is that Amazon imposes something called the most favored nation status clause on every one of its sellers. And the way that works is that the seller has to covenant that they will not offer goods for sale at a price lower than they are offered for sale at Amazon, including direct to consumer, which means that the prices at Target and Walmart and your corner store are all higher because Amazon is taking 50% of the price of its marketplace goods. They have to raise the prices everywhere. This is why DC Attorney General Ken Racine is suing Amazon for price fixing. So that's one way that you see surpluses transferred from buyers and sellers and given to Amazon. Another way is really important in Amazon's creative products, Audible, ACX, and Kindle and KUP. Last night, I appeared on the radio show for these guys, 2600 magazine. It's the old Hacker Quarterly, one of my favorite old magazines. They put all their energy into figuring out how to be one of the subscription magazines on Kindle. Kindle just unilaterally moved them all into this program called Kindle Unlimited and reduced their revenues by like 80%. Just overnight like that. So that's just a way of transferring a surplus from a publisher to Amazon, because now Amazon can lock more people into the Kindle because they've made all of the products being carried by these creative suppliers like magazine publishers, they made them cheaper and force those publishers to subsidize it. But it's much worse for independent creative workers, writers who use ACX, which is Audible's self-serve platform, or use the Kindle platform. Audible is a really important special case here. Audible comprises 90% of the audiobook market in most commercially relevant genres. They are truly a monopolist. And Audible is a division of Amazon. Amazon acquired them through an anti-competitive merger in 2008. And Amazon has a requirement for everyone who sells on Audible that they have to lock their products with Audible's DRM. Even if you don't want it, you have to have it. Unlike, say, the Kindle, where you can choose, Audible, you cannot choose. You have to have Audible DRM. Every book sold on Audible is locked in perpetuity beyond the expiry of its copyright to Audible's platform forever, right? So ACX is Audible's content exchange. It's the self-serve platform for independents and small publishers. They're the people with the least power to push back. And ACX was the nexus of a wage theft scandal called Audiblegate, where Amazon was caught stealing more than $100 million from independent authors. And the reason that they did that, or the way that they did that, is they said to Audible subscribers, who are people who pre-commit to buying a book every month from Audible, which means that they never shop anywhere else. This is very key, right? Remember, locking in users allows them to lock in writers. So they have to lock in those users. So they want to promote those subscriptions. What they said to them is, we are such good-natured slobs that I tell you what, if for any reason you don't like this audiobook, for a whole year after you buy it, you can return it. We'll give you a full credit. You can get another audiobook. That's true even if you've listened to it 3 times over. They know that because they spy on everything you do with Audible books. It's true even if you leave a positive review for it. They sent people emails, they sent them pop-up messages. They said, just return your audiobooks. This is a very generous thing for Amazon to do, and it raises this question, like, how can they afford it? And the answer is they charged it to the authors and then they hid it from them. So what they did was they showed authors net sales figures that didn't include the returns or didn't break out the returns. So what authors saw was that their weekly sales were going from like 50 copies to 40 copies to 30 copies to 10 to 5. What they didn't know is they were still selling 50 copies, but by the time they got to 5, 45 of them were being returned, so that Amazon could make its subscription offer more valuable to its subscribers and make sure that they never shopped anywhere else. And all of this only came to light once there was a kind of data dump where Audible accidentally did 3 weeks worth of returns in one day, and a bunch of authors woke up and said, how is it that I just sold negative 20 books? I don't know how I sell a negative book. So, this may sound okay if you're the reader, because you're getting subsidized books. If you don't care about the author, I think readers do care about authors. I don't think anyone ever bought a book on Audible because they wanted to make sure that, like, Jeff Bezos never ran out of penis rockets. But even if you're like the kind of sociopath who's like, I love this art, but the artist can go, hang. I still think that those people are getting a worse experience because now Audible is putting ads in audiobooks. Right. And again, that's just a way of saying, we know you can't go anywhere else, so we can make the process worse. We can enshittify it. Right. So that's the enshittification life cycle. Surpluses are allocated first to users, then to business customers, then to shareholders. Now, enshittification seeks an equilibrium where not all of the surpluses are transferred to shareholders. You have to leave behind just enough surplus, enough value that the consumers and the producers remain locked in. Otherwise, they'll go somewhere else and the business collapses. But this is a very brittle equilibrium. It can be tipped over by a very small shock, a privacy scandal, a whistleblower complaint, highly public platform abuses, a live stream mass shooting. It can make people just decide, like, what, this platform seemed like I couldn't live without it until yesterday. Today, I'm ready to go. This is, what's happening on Twitter right now. And you can see what happens when the platforms reach the end of the enshittification process, when they're not disciplined by competition, not disciplined by regulation, have this ability to kind of abuse at will their customers and their business users. What they end up doing is thrashing. So, Facebook has reinvented itself as a company called Meta, and now it insists that platform users are going to live out the rest of our days as highly surveilled, low resolution, legless, sexless cartoon characters in a metaverse that's named for an idea from an old dystopian science fiction novel. Now, it is okay that platforms collapse. The focus of our intermediary regulation, the regulation of these platforms, shouldn't be just making the platforms better. It should be protecting platform users from the enshittification cycle. Right now, a lot of our platform regulation is about prolonging the crepuscular senescence of these vast platforms as they sink under their own weight. So I'm going to propose 2 ways that we can improve the outcomes for platform users without regard to protecting the platforms from their own foolishness. The first one is to restore end-to-end. End-to-end is a very old idea in technological design. It was the underlying principle of the internet. Under an end-to-end system, the job of the network is to deliver packets from willing senders to willing receivers. Unlike, say, the Bell system, where their job was to only connect people if they were willing to pay, only connect people if Bell could figure out how to do it. If you invented caller ID and put a caller ID box on your phone, and then you gave me a caller ID sending box so that I could put it on my phone, so that I could transmit the fact that it's me if I was calling during dinner and you know to pick up. You couldn't make that work under the Bell system, right? They had to put that in at the central office and charge you money for it. Under the end-to-end system, I could create Facebook and you could be a Facebook user, and your ISP and my ISP just have no insight into what we're doing. They have no ability to stop it, to monetize it, to charge rent for it. Their only job is to deliver packets from willing senders to willing receivers and back again. We do not have end-to-end at the service level at all. The platforms routinely make it impossible or merely very difficult for you to hear from the people you've explicitly asked to hear from. An end-to-end principle for platforms would mean that if I subscribe to your feed, then I should see everything you post. If I search for your goods and there's a result in the e-commerce corpus that matches that search query, that item should be at the top of the results. If I hoist an email from you out of my Gmail spam and mark it as non-spam, all future emails from you should be delivered without going into my spam folder. It was surreal last year to hear Congress debating whether marking unsolicited political fundraising email was spam, whether that was a form of political censorship. And it ignored the much more salient point, which is that if you ask to hear from your elected representative, there's no way to guarantee delivery of their messages. And indeed, most of their messages are going to end up in your spam folder. Consensual messages should not be blocked by our email providers. Now, beyond end-to-end, there's another part that's really important to trying to protect users from enshittification. And that's what I call the right to exit. You may have heard about a Mastodon server called mastodon.lol. They had 12,000 users, and those users got into a huge flame war about the new Harry Potter game. And Nathan, the guy who administered the server, is a volunteer, just hosted these people out of the goodness of his heart. He's like, this is not what I signed up for. I'm going to shut down the server. You guys are all going to have to find somewhere else. Now, that might sound terrible to you, but Mastodon has this very easy mechanism to migrate to another server. You just export the list of your followers and the people you wish to, and the people you're following with one click. And then with another click, you import them into any other Mastodon server, and they all just move over instantaneously, and you're back up and running. Which means that Nathan's 12,000 users have it much better than the 450 million Twitter users who can't leave the platform without losing all their followers and everyone they follow, which would shatter their social network. So the right to exit rule would build on existing data protection laws, like the California Consumer Protection Act, or like the European GDPR, that would require both large and small platform operators to provide users with machine readable files that they need to reestablish themselves on other platforms. And unlike other regulations that we are trying to impose on platforms, like rules about banning lawful but awful content like harassment or hate speech, or copyright filter mandates where they have to spend $100 million to filter all user submissions to see if it violates copyright, one of these rules is not a capital moat that prevents new market entrants, right? Doing end-to-end does not require that you have millions of dollars to comply, which means that only the largest firms can afford to operate. It's free, right? If you're just running a Mastodon server, all you have to do is not turn off the export function. Moreover, it is eminently administratable, right? Anytime a Twitter user or one of Nathan's users allege that they weren't provided with data. We don't need a long fact-finding mission where we depose the engineers to figure out whether they're following the rules. We just order Twitter or Nathan to send them another copy of the data. We don't have to create a parallel corporate civil justice system to adjudicate content moderation calls or the decision to ban a user. We just make it easier for end users and business users to take their custom elsewhere. In other words, we could treat bad platform owners as damage and red around them. Now, as I developed this enshittification thesis and started talking about it in public, some people said, this just sounds like rent seeking or fraud or wage theft. And I want to say that it's more than that. I want to say that it is a phenomenon endemic to digital platforms. It does share a common root with other competition problems. For 40 years, we have not enforced antitrust. That has changed because the Biden administration appointed some very good trust busters, Lena Khan at the Federal Trade Commission, Jonathan Cantor at the Department of Justice, and other people who work with them. For 40 years, we did allow anti-competitive mergers and predatory pricing to corral business users and end users and deprive them of alternatives. That's as true of, say, professional wrestling where there's only one league, or beer where there's only two companies, or international shipping where there's only three cartels, as it is about the web where there's 4 giant websites filled with screenshots of text from the other 3. And so there are few alternatives on the web, but there are 2 uniquely digital aspects to enshittification beyond just a failure to enforce antitrust. The first is that platforms are able to twiddle. They can change the platform rules at the click of a mouse. And when you play a shell game, velocity matters. The quickness of the hand is what deceives the eye. So every platform scandal involves high-speed digital maneuvers that just wouldn't be possible in the analog world. Think of Jeff Bezos, the grocer who owns Whole Foods. If Jeff Bezos wants to price gouge on eggs, he needs an army of teenagers on roller skates with pricing guns to reprice all the eggs, right? Now think of Jeff Bezos as the grocer who owns Amazon Fresh. When he wants to price gouge on eggs, he just moves a slider. So JP Morgan, John D. Rockefeller, Carnegie, they would have done all this stuff if they could. But, if you're a rail baron hoping to destroy a ferry company, you can't just lay track in a way that obviates its business overnight. But Amazon can move a slider, as it did with diapers.com, which was a company that refused to sell to Amazon. And Amazon just underpriced its diapers, losing $200 million a month by selling diapers below cost until diapers.com went out of business. All they had to do was move a slider and the diapers.com went away. Which tells us that the platforms, they're not run by evil sorcerers who are hacking our dopamine loops. They're run by ordinary mediocrities using the same repertoire of tricks as their forebears, but they're using computers to do it faster. This is why whenever you see platform users like entertainers doing the kind of Kremlinology, which they used to do in the Soviet Union, where they would just try and read the signs to figure out which political ideologies would get them promoted and which ones would get them sent to a gulag. Today, you have platform users who are doing platform Kremlinology. They're like, oh, don't swear in the first 20 seconds of my YouTube video, or I'll get downranked, and I'll get upranked if I use these 2 primary colors in my thumbnail, and so on. It's so frustrating because even though they sometimes are right, sometimes they do kind of controlled, thoughtful experiments to figure out what's going on in the back end, the platform can change it at the flip of a switch, with the twiddle of a knob. Now, twiddling isn't all bad. Users can twiddle too, right? You think about ad blockers, the largest boycott in world history. That is users twiddling the browser so that things that the server asks the browser to show them just don't get loaded. Removing DRM, jailbreaking a device, installing an alternative app store, that is the user's twiddling. It's the twiddling that seizes the means of computation to claw back value from platform operators. So, for example, publishers who are getting ripped off by Facebook and Google, who had an illegal collusive arrangement called Jedi Blue, where they rigged the ad market so that more than 50% of all the advertising money was going to them and not to the publishers. They invented this thing called header bidding, which let them use other exchanges other than Facebook's and Google's to place ads on their services preferentially to Facebook and Google. Google went in and whacked that. Google and Facebook created a program where if they caught you doing that, they would rip you off even more. But that was a form of twiddling. So the issue isn't merely that platforms twiddle with every hour that God sends, that they just can't stop touching the knobs. It's that they hoard all the twiddling. They use anti-circumvention laws like the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. They use terms of service. They use contract claims like tortious interference. They use cybersecurity laws like the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. They use patents, and they use other legal regimes to erect a kind of shell around what they do that we can call the felony contempt of business model shell. We're doing anything that displeases their shareholders is a literal crime, and that lets them twiddle you and criminalizes any time you twiddle back. So to get our internet back, we need to de-enshittify it. We need to give up on the counsel to despair that says that we will never defeat these evil sorcerers in our dopamine loops. And instead, we need to engage with the material, technical, and legal forces that drive enshittification and throw them into reverse. And that means, on the one hand, let's keep doing antitrust, merger scrutiny, structural separation, and other traditional antitrust. There's a new bill in Congress backed by both Ted Cruz and Elizabeth Warren to break up the ad tech giants. That's what I mean by traditional antitrust. But then we need constraints on the way that platforms twiddle us, privacy laws, minimum wage laws for gig workers, and other fairness-based rules that keep their fingers off their knobs. And we need to reinvigorate user-side twiddling. We need to mandate interoperability. We need to create defenses in law for reverse engineering and for bots and scraping, all those things that people do to break out of these firms' walled gardens, which are really just walled prisons. Because a world where platforms are not constrained by competition or regulation, a world where they can add as many knobs as they want to the backend and twiddle them all they want, and a world where we are legally prohibited from twiddling back at them is a world where we will inevitably get twiddled to death. So that's my talk. Thank you.
Great, Cory. Horrifying, but great. I'm going to take a prerogative here before I introduce Steve and ask a question about what you consider motivation. So, do these people start out this way? Or, I mean, it seemed like Larry and Sergey had come up with a really useful tool. They were making it available to everybody. Is it just, it's just a natural function over time? Is this greed sets in? Is it capitalism that causes this to happen? Or what do you think is the motivation for this?
I think that, this is a question about microeconomics and macroeconomics. So macroeconomically, we say to these companies, you have unlimited access to the capital markets. You can buy your competitors, right? So if you're Google and you have one good idea, which is a search engine, and no other good ideas, Google has never made a successful product after making a search engine, right? They cloned Hotmail, they made Gmail. Everything else they made in-house was a failure or a clone of someone else's product, like Chrome, where they use someone else's engine, WebKit, to build Chrome. Or it's a product they bought from someone else, right? The YouTube, their entire ad tech stack, their mobile stack, their server management stack, docs, calendaring, everything. An acquisition that we would have prohibited before Ronald Reagan, right? This is the change in antitrust law that we're at the end of after 40 years. So what it does is it lets people who are no better than you or me and who have one good idea bargain that idea into a kind of permanent dominance. And they're out of their depth, right? Like you can see this now where they're like, oh my God, our search results suck because Google search results really suck these days. We're going to fix them by having a stock buyback and then firing 12,000 workers whose wages would have been paid for by that stock buyback for the next 27 years. And then we're going to take of our remaining workforce, thousands of them off of the job and devote all of their energies to replacing search results with florid paragraphs written by a chatbot that doesn't know when it's lying, right? Like these are the actions. This is their version of Meta, right? Of the legless, sexless cartoon character bid, right? These are people who had one good idea 25 years ago and have spent the last 25 years wallowing in imposter syndrome as they fail and fail and fail, but continue to succeed by buying other people's successes from them, right? So that's I think the kind of microeconomics that lives in the macroeconomics. I also think that if you want to think of Google as like a collective enterprise, because it's kind of a mistake to assume that Larry and Sergey are making all the day-to-day decisions. Although I'll note that if you read the PageRank paper that they published in 1998 describing how Google would work, it opens by saying ad-supported search engines will inevitably suck and you shouldn't support your search engine with ads. So here you have a company where they own 51% of the voting stock, and they founded the company by saying this is the risk that our business faces, and they still fell into the trap, which I think tells you that it doesn't really matter what kind of insights the people have, because the trap is the macroeconomic trap. The microeconomics goes like this. you're sitting around the boardroom table and you say, let's do something that makes things materially worse for our users, but improves our bottom line. If no one around the table can say, well, wait a second, here's the real business cost. This many users can be expected to defect from the service and go to a rival and lower our incomes as a result, then the person with the bad idea always wins, right? And over time, the bad idea and the bad idea and the bad idea accrete in the same way that any set of compromises starts with one little compromise to your principle and then another little compromise that takes you not further from is not measured based on where you were before you made the first compromise, but is only measured relative to this position you're at now. And then you make another little compromise, another and another and another. And before you know it, you're, running a platform where they live stream mass shootings.
Good take. Thanks. Stephen, take us out here for you and Jonathan.
Yeah, to be honest, the main thing I was thinking about is if you're talking about enshittification in the EU, you've got to translate it into 22 other languages, which would be its own sort of exciting exercise.
There's a cottage industry of people translating into French and German and Spanish and so on. It's already underway.
I'm glad there's good bottom up stuff. I'm going to hand over to Jonathan first. Actually, Jonathan.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Cory, for this great input. Well, I was thinking also about how to translate to Spanish, because I'm from Mexico, this enshittification. So I guess it will be very interesting. So speaking on monopolization, with few companies controlling everything we consume, it's hard not to get into some of these companies, even if you don't use them directly. I mean, you can be on Facebook, but Facebook still has a record on you. And this is, I think this is the history of the internet during the last 10 or 20 years, maybe, where big companies buy small and brilliant competitors, eliminating alternative and creating a dependency. So what libraries can do to help correct all the enshittification, or as you mentioned, to de-enshittificate? And there is also another concept you have worked, which I found very interesting, which is interoperability, and how libraries fit on this idea.
Yeah. So, you're right that this is not a thing you can solve individually. And some of you may be familiar with the wonderful Zephyr Teachout. That is her real name. It's an old Quaker name. She is a law professor. She ran for the governor of New York with Tim Wu as her running mate, the guy coined the term net neutrality, and also for Attorney General of New York. And she, in her book, Break 'em Up, she has this great chapter where she says, look, this is not about your individual failure to shop your way out of monopoly, right? That's like definitionally impossible. It's like recycling your way out of the climate emergency. And, by all means, if you can buy things in a way that supports workers, including creative workers, you should, but don't make it your overwhelming passion. If there's a protest down at your Amazon warehouse over their labor conditions and you never make it because you spend 2 hours driving around looking for an artisanal marker shop that won't give the money to Amazon, Amazon wins, right? You might have eventually made your protest sign without giving a nickel to Amazon, but you missed the protest. And so you got to focus on these things as systemic problems and not individual problems. And, I think that in the case of libraries, because they are institutionally so important and do enjoy so much public support, notwithstanding some loud, anti-democratic, terrified, projecting homophobes, that this is a place where when you are offered a bad deal, when all the publishers offer you a bad deal, when all the distributors offer you a bad deal, when a distributor buys another distributor and zeroes out your choice to just one firm, this is an area where you should be, through your professional associations, including if you're a state library, through the state library apparatus, going to your attorney general, your state attorney general. AG stands for aspiring governor. And these antitrust cases are incredibly attractive to AGs because they produce huge fines, which fund the AG's office. This is why the Texas AG is leading, who's a terrible person, Ken Paxton, but he's leading the antitrust charge against Google. I don't think he gives a damn about Google, but I do think he likes the idea of taking a giant chunk of $1 trillion company and allocating it to his state coffers. So, this is an area where you have a confluence of interest. The other thing about these circumstances is that they are intrinsically unstable, right? As Stein's law has it, anything that can't go on forever eventually stops. And so we lurch from crisis to crisis in the area of competition, particularly in books and libraries. You can see this happening with the Internet Archive right now. Also, with respect to publishing and tech, there's the JCPA about to be reintroduced in Congress. That's a tax on links. So if you're Facebook or Google, you have to pay a tax to let your users link to news stories. It's a terrible way to run this. These are moments where, as the crisis arises, if we are already talking about and demanding solutions through our professional associations, through our groups, to our patrons, if we're already saying, how about if instead of paying a tax on links, we reform the ad tech industry, right? We back this ad tech breakup bill, which will drop the amount of money going to publishers, for the amount of money owed to the publishers going to big tech from 50% to 10%, and give them 40% more money on all the advertising that they run. Or how about if we break the App Store duopoly, which takes 30% of every dollar earned through the app stores, which would give the publishers an extra 30% on every subscriber they have without adding another subscriber, right? Like, that's the kind of thing where we can move in at these moments where they're saying, well, there is a definite problem. It's a real problem. I think the problems of big tech and media are real. And here's this completely bogus, absurd solution that won't make things any better. We can step in and say, here's this other idea that we've been talking about for years, that we've had speakers on, that our organization has published articles about, that, there's a working group to support, that there's model legislation, that there's, that this is an idea that people support. How about if we do this instead? How about if we do something that works instead of just something that is easy? And so I think that's how you advance these solutions, that you don't do it by doing it as an individual. You have to think of it as a long-run systemic program. I mean, the forces that gave us monopoly are a long-run systemic force, right? That's that they got here through long-run patient planning. And this brings me to the final piece I'll say about my theory of change here. So back in the 1960s and early 1970s, Milton Friedman, who is the architect of neoliberal economics, he was at the University of Chicago School of Economics, and he's really the person most directly responsible for our current economic system, its monopolies, its woes, its inequality, and its corruption, as well as the destruction of the planet. He was fighting against the New Deal and the benefits that had come as a result of it, where an unprecedented but uneven group of Americans had experienced access to prosperity and social mobility that their forebears had not. It was not racially equal. It had gaps in its gender and gender expression stuff, but all of that was like part of the movement post New Deal. It's where feminism, Black liberation, civil rights movement, they all come out of that, even if they were laggards in the transfer of wealth to white working class people. They were also in train. And so people liked the Great Society. They liked the New Deal. They liked social mobility. They liked sending their kids to college. They liked owning their own homes. They liked being able to take vacations. They liked having healthcare. They liked those things. And Milton Friedman wanted to get rid of them. And people said, Milton, how are you going to convince people to get rid of these things that they like? How are you going to convince them to do something that makes their lives significantly materially worse? He said, look, when crisis strikes, and there will always be a crisis, because even if we do everything perfectly, there will be wars, oil shocks, meteor strikes, pandemics, you name it, some crisis will happen eventually. When that crisis strikes, ideas lying around move from the fringe to the center. And we are in a period of polycrisis, as Don said at the beginning of this session, right, where we have crisis piled upon crisis piled upon crisis every day, a new crisis. When those crises strike, if we have developed our ideas at the fringe, those ideas lying around will move rapidly to the center if we finish them there. And so this is the theory of change.
Thank you, Cory. Well, I would like to highlight this idea of think of strategies as a long systemic program. And speaking on crisis, there is a topic that is of the interest of libraries, and I would like to hear your idea on this, which is disinformation. You know that over the last decade, we have seen an increasing lack of trust in media, in government, in science, and cultural institutions. And many social events have powered this. Since 2016, the media have mentioned that we live in the post-truth era. And then with the pandemic came the so-called infodemic or disinfodemics, and many other terms involving the trinomial information, technology, and health. We have a lot of this. And we have seen a wide range of responses to disinformation, from policy and legislative measures to technological efforts and media and education literacy initiative from libraries, of course. There is also this approach I heard from you to first fix the companies, forcing social media or giant social media to fight disinformation. But I guess it is more complex than that. So with the rise of artificial intelligence, we have now more accurate deep fakes, more creative ideas from conspiracy theories. And as a result, we have more fragmented societies. So what's your opinion on this problem, and how do you envision the disinformation landscape in the medium term of 10 years?
So the critic Lee Vinsel, he's got this term, he calls it crita-hype. And crita-hype is when you criticize something but hype it up at the same time by taking its claims at face value. So, Mark Zuckerberg and his friends in the ad tech industry, they invented all this nonsense about hacking dopamine loops. And what they're basically claiming is that they created a mind control ray. And there's a reason that if you're selling advertising, you want to tell people that you invented a mind control ray, because lots of advertisers would like to be able to convince people to buy their stuff. And so you say to them, you should pay extra to buy stuff with us because we have big data and data mining and artificial intelligence, and we can make people believe that up is down and left is right. And so when we go out there and we say, oh, look, Mark Zuckerberg built a mind control ray to sell your nephew a fidget spinner, and then Vladimir Putin stole it and made your uncle into a QAnon, we're actually helping Mark Zuckerberg sell ads. Everyone who ever claimed to have a mind control ray was lying to themselves or everyone else or both. That's true of Rasputin. It's true of Mesmer. It's true of people who believe in neuro-linguistic programming, pickup artists, CIA and MK Ultra, all of them either deluded or con artists or both. I think that we should look for more parsimonious explanations, simpler explanations for how it is that people end up believing in outlandish things as a result of what they see on big tech. And I think that the most obvious one is that if you are willing to believe conspiratorial accounts of institutional failure, then it's a great correlate of that is that you live in a place where the institutions have previously failed you, right? So when people say, I don't believe in vaccines because the pharmaceutical companies are run by sociopath billionaires who don't care who they kill so long as they make a profit, and the regulators who are supposed to be holding them to account are no better and they're enthralled to them, that's not wrong, right? I have a chronic pain problem. I mentioned I got these 2 artificial hips. I went to see a doctor 10 years ago and he said, why don't you just take opioids for the rest of your life? There's new research. They're super safe. You should just take opioids. Everyone should take opioids. They're great, right? I did my own research, right? I went online and I concluded that there was a conspiracy by the Sackler family, sociopath billionaires, who had their name on a bunch of public buildings, including maybe some of your libraries, along with the FDA and their other watchdogs, who were colluding to kill people so that they could get rich. 800,000 dead Americans later, I think I've been vindicated. And I have to tell you, as someone who's not a biologist or a virologist or an addiction researcher, I can't tell you why I trust vaccines as a scientific matter. I do. I am fully vaxxed. I spent a day on the sofa last week after my second shingles vaccine. Once again, I'm an old person, but as an epistemological matter, my belief in vaccines is no more or less coherent than my disbelief in opioids. And I'm not saying that we can't do anything about conspiratorial belief until we reform all of our institutions, but I am saying that the emphasis on trying to make people more rational, when there is in fact a rational basis for mistrusting institutions, and the failure to focus on improving the quality of our institutions, right, to make them more responsive, to end the revolving door between government and industry, to end the monopolization of our sectors. One of the things that monopolies do is they change our regulatory questions from truth-seeking exercises to auctions. And there's 100 companies in a sector. Say if there were 100 ISPs in America, and you said, should we have net neutrality? The FCC opens this question, opens a docket, notice of inquiry, notice of proposed rulemaking. The input that they would get, half of it would come from ISPs that were like, they advertise that they are the neutral ISP that will give you the packets you ask for as quickly as they can. The other half will come from ones who have a story about why you should only see the packets that are most profitable to them because it makes network management better, right? And you will get evidence from the ISPs that are running a clean operation, a neutral operation, will say there is no network management issue here. Look, here's our network logs. Here's our uptime. Here's our stats, right? And the other side will say, no, you're wrong. And you will have an adversarial truth-seeking exercise in a public forum that will be adjudicated by a neutral expert. Because the thing is, if there are 100 ISPs, there will be lots of people who understand how the ISPs work who aren't executives from ISPs. When there's 3, everyone who works who understands how the ISPs works for an ISP. So imagine there's 3 or 5 or 7 ISPs as we have now in America. When you ask about net neutrality, they all show up and sing from the same playbook. In fact, they all know each other. I mean, you may remember John Legere, who took over T-Mobile and called himself the CEO of the phone company. John Legere was a lifetime executive at Sprint and AT&T. The idea that he was an industry outsider is laughable on its face. There are no industry outsiders in the upper echelons of the telecoms industry. They all know each other. They're godparents to each other's children. They walk each other down the aisle. They're executors of each other's estates. They get together at Passover and Easter. They know each other. And so when they show up, asked whether or not we should have network neutrality, they're like, nope, we should definitely not have network neutrality. And the only people saying anything otherwise is some academics or people who run little community ISPs that can be safely ignored, right? So the reason our policy sucks is because of monopoly, right? So like, if we're not ever going to bring in the material conditions that lead to conspiratorial accounts of the world, and we focus on conspiratorialism as a kind of contagion, which, I think it is in the sense that, like, if you think that the world is really screwed up and someone comes to you and says it's because of the Jewish bankers or whatever, you may already have been kind of an anti-Semite. You may already have been, prone to conspiratorial beliefs. But the thing that makes that most plausible, the convincer there, is that you live in a world where the institutions have materially failed and you are looking for an account of it, and no one will give you an account that isn't conspiratorial. In fact, when you have a political contest, as we did in 2016, where someone goes out and says the system is rigged, you have their political opponent who says, no, the system isn't rigged. America was always great, right? What an idiotic slogan, right? Like nobody should ever be given an opportunity to run for office whose slogan is America was always great, because that is a way to make sure that no matter what your opponent is saying, lots of people will vote for them, because at least they're saying something is wrong. And if you're saying nothing is wrong and all the problems you're having are your fault, then everyone who has a problem isn't going to vote for you, right? So that, I think, is the way to understand conspiratorialism. When people see a deep fake of a politician conspiring to child traffic in a world in which Jeffrey Epstein operated with absolute impunity, and his co-conspirators are still today running around going to Met galas and so on, we should really consider the role that impunity plays in making the deep fake plausible. Because a deep fake in which a politician says, up is down, left is right, black is white, and I'm secretly from Mars, that is not going to get the traction that a deep fake that says rich elites are colluding to abuse children with impunity, because we know that rich elites did collude to abuse children with impunity. Like, that is an incontrovertible fact. And so, the swivel-eyed loons have a point, is what I'm saying here. And when we focus on conspiratorialism as an ideological matter, instead of as a downstream of material conditions, we will never be able to fix conspiratorialism. We will just end up saying, like, can you please just stop believing in the things that your lived experience tells you is true? And that's just a losing battle.
It's a tough one. Cory, one of the arguments against busting up these monopolists is it advantages China, the competitors of China. It's treated as sort of closed system. It's a U.S. and the West or something like that. The Europeans are doing a lot, or a lot more anyway, than the U.S. regulators, but you still get this answer. Well, then the Chinese will just simply take over if you undermine our ability to operate. So what do you say to that?
Okay, well, for 69 years, the Department of Justice tried to break up AT&T. In 1982, they managed it. And at the time that they broke up AT&T, the American business lobby had this line. They said, AT&T is America's bulwark that defends us against an authoritarian Far Eastern Asian state that steals our intellectual property, was our military adversary in living memory, and wants to take over America and destroy our high-tech industry. That country was Japan. It turned out that what AT&T was really doing was kneeling on the chest of the American tech industry, because AT&T's major project was preventing the spread of modems and preventing the rise of end-to-end, because what they wanted was for every service provided over its wires to generate rents for AT&T, and for things that competed with its service, notably long distance, which today we don't have long distance calls. Here we are on a long distance call that costs nothing. They wanted those to remain a money spinner for them. Today, 40 years later, you would have to be just an idiot to argue that breaking up AT&T was bad for the American political project on the world stage. There is nothing that projected more American power abroad than breaking up AT&T. China does not act like Baidu and its other tech companies are its national champions. Xi Jinping is rounding up their top executives and sticking them in gulags, right? That tells you that Xi Jinping firmly believes that the interest that these firms project outside of China's borders are their shareholders, and not the firms themselves. So when, sellouts like Nick Clegg, who is the deputy prime minister in the United Kingdom, now gets $4 million a year to front Facebook around the world to his former colleagues in politics, when he says we have to keep European cyberspace sovereign from China, and that's why we can't break up Facebook, he is lying. He has been paid $4 million to lie. I don't think he believes it. I think that Nick Clegg is representing Facebook, not Europe. I think that Eric Schmidt represents Google, not America. I think that Peter Thiel represents Peter Thiel, not America. I don't think that the threat to American cyberspace is Chinese tech companies. I think the threat to American cyberspace is American monopolies that make Chinese companies more attractive. I mean, it's amazing to think that we finally saw some breakage of the Facebook-Google deadlock, and it came from China. That is not a scary thing about China. It is an indictment of the sluggishness and lack of innovation in American tech, which has spent every hour that God sent for the last 20 years figuring how to generate 0.5% more clicks on ads instead of making products that people love. They need the discipline of competition and regulation. They are in no way our friends, not least because all of these businesses rely on and act as cover for the data broker industry, right? Facebook and Google, they gather a lot of data on you as primary data collectors, but they are among the most prolific consumers of commercial data broker data, which they merge with the data that they collect on you. And they and the data broker industry have done everything they could to prevent a federal privacy law from passing in America. If you were to ban TikTok tomorrow, China could just put a credit card down with those data brokers and gather all the same data they're gathering from TikTok. right? I mean, if we're worried about people being targeted by foreign actors, let's make our tech companies stop gathering data on us. And to do that, we have to make them weaker, because right now they're too powerful.
Fair point. It's time to close out here. But since we're a group of librarians here, and you're surrounded by books, and books are kind of where this all started, I want to just ask you for some book recommendations in science fiction. You have some favorite books out there today you can put forth and close us out?
Well, I pasted this into the chat before. I'm going to paste it again. Whoops, sorry, that's the wrong paste. That's a bunch of years. Sorry, here we go. This is all my reviews from the last 3 years. In terms of science fiction I've read recently that I've enjoyed, I really like Ruth Anna Emrys's A Half-Built Garden. I thought that was a superb novel. It really, if you're interested in the role that statistical inference engines can play in deliberation and in kind of summarizing the substance of a debate and allowing lots of people to deliberate together, as well as what a post-climate emergency world where we dedicated ourselves to addressing the emergency instead of outrunning it or ignoring it, where the emergency was still unfolding, but we were actually engaged with it, as well as just a cracking first contact alien space adventure. Ruth Anna Emrys's Half-Built Garden, I think, is a superb book. I strongly recommend it.
Great. Okay, let's wrap this up. Let's close the recording here. We don't. This is not a TV program. We're not hemmed in by arbitrary time. But let's thank everybody. If we were together, we would give you a round of applause. But I'll just have to do it on behalf of everybody.
Dylan raises a great point here in the chat. None of my books are for sale on Audible because Audible won't carry them without DRM, which means that I have to kickstart them. I'm running a Kickstarter. You can go to redteamblues.com to pre-order that audiobook. I got to the studio last week. Will Wheaton recorded it. He did a superb job. It's just amazing. It's sold DRM free. It is sold DRM free without terms of service. You can integrate it into your library collection. You don't have to pay outrageous audiobook prices. You just pay the $20 and then it's in your library collection for your patrons. You can get it for yourself too. I think that having these Kickstarters do really well is the first step to convincing a critical mass of authors to demand better of Audible.
Very good. Thank you, Dylan. All right. Well, with that, we'll close the recording. Thank you, Cory and Stephen and